In May of last year, I bought this here 1992 Mazda Miata, completely sight unseen, and it was not in the condition that I was told it was, but I had already paid for it, so I was kind of stuck with it. The car only had 52,000 miles when I purchased it, and it was burning oil, and it had lifter tick, and the stock engines in these only put out about 100 horsepower, which, I mean, the car's light, but it's not light enough to justify only 100 horsepower. The Mazda Miata is technically considered a sports car, but this thing can barely keep up with highway traffic, it was so slow. So, much like many Miata owners, I wanted more power. And there's a few things you could do to get more power. You could go full bolt-ons and get like 10 more horsepower. You could throw a turbo in it or a supercharger, and then you'll get some decent power gains. Or you can engine swap it. I was originally going to do a turbo build, but my engine was burning about a quart of oil every 500 miles, and so like a turbo or a supercharger would not have been good because I would have kept the same engine. I could have rebuilt the engine, but that would have been about $3,000, and I would have had to buy the turbo kit, which would have been about another $3,000 just to get about 200 to 250 horsepower. So that's when I started looking at more alternatives. So I ultimately decided I was going to engine swap it. What engine though? I decided I was going to go with the GM LE5 ECOTEC. This swap can be done for under $5,000, and it gets you right around 200 horsepower, give or take. Most people see about 180 horsepower to the wheels. The advantage of this, although it being expensive, it gives you a lot more power, almost double stock, and you get it's a GM engine, so it's going to be reliable, naturally aspirated, so if I wanted to in the future, if I wanted even more power, I could throw a turbo or a supercharger on it, which there exists from the factory turbo and supercharged versions of the ECOTEC engine out of the Cobalt SS. So I put in my order for the ECOTEC swap kit through ECOTEC Miata on October 14th, and I didn't get my swap kit until March 20th. So it took them a very long time to make it, but I finally got it, and I'm finally able to start working on getting the new engine installed. As you can see, amidst all of the swap components in the front bumper, which is completely destroyed, I already have the engine out. So if you're using this video as a guide, you're going to want to have the engine out, which there are many videos already on YouTube about removing the engine out of a Miata. So it would have been kind of redundant to do that. So with this swap, you retain use of the original 5-speed in the NA Miata. If you plan on running more power, you could run the 6-speed out of the NB Miata, or you could run the AR5, which already exists in a lot of ECOTEC builds. To get started with this swap, you're going to need the swap kit and an engine. I got my engine out of a 2007 Pontiac Solstice. The swap kit, however, there's only one company that makes them, and you kind of need that unless you're really handy with custom fab. With the swap kit, you're going to get a new oil pan for your ECOTEC engine. You're also going to get a lot of fasteners and clamps and sensors to work with the kit to mate it up seamlessly with the already existing Miata stuff. You're of course going to need new engine mounts to make the new engine mount in the Miata engine bay. Since you're going to be using the stock transmission, you're going to need a flywheel adapter, so here's that. You're also going to get sway bar relocation brackets to relocate your sway bar so that it doesn't foul on anything. You're going to get a bell housing adapter to adapt the engine to the transmission. You're going to get various hoses for the cooling system. Here's like the dipstick. Here's an intake tube. Here's an air filter. That all comes with the kit. You get that for the intake. And you're also going to get some spacers for the cooling system. Alright, so your first step is going to be to install your serpentine pulley for the alternator. I'm not going to be running power steering or air conditioning. If you did, you'd have some more stuff going on here and you'd have to use a different belt. But I'm using the belt off of a 2004 Cavalier without air conditioning. So you're just going to install this on. Alright, so you're going to get the belt around the crankshaft pulley, and then you're going to use a 3/8 ratchet on this. You can see you got I have an extension on the 3/8 ratchet, but if you put torque on it, it moves, there's a spring in it, so you torque that up and then you can situate the belt around the alternator. Alright, so we got the serpentine belt on. It was a little more difficult than I was expecting, but it wasn't too bad. So we got the tensioning, and it's around the crankshaft pulley and the alternator. Next, you're going to want to start working on installing the adapter plates for the coolant system. So you're going to want to remove these 3 bolts here, they're 10 millimeter, and then the 2 on the thermostat housing. I already have started loosening these, but you're going to want to start on the back ones, get those loose, and then do these ones. The bolts supplied from the ECOTEC Miata kit are these ones, and the bag is labeled with these hieroglyphics. I have no idea what that says, but they're for the cooling system. You also have these 2 adapter plates, which are made out of CNC'd aluminum, which are pretty nice, that we're going to be installing with some RTV gasket sealer. ECOTEC Miata recommends Permatex Ultra Black for the oil pan and the cooling system. Before you start installing anything on the engine, make sure that you've drained it of coolant and oil, because we don't want that getting in with the gaskets and making a huge mess of things. Just make sure that that's gone. You're also going to want to remove a variety of things from the engine, such as your AC compressor, because we don't need that, your exhaust manifold. ECOTEC Miata has a pretty good write-up on all of this. So I now have all the bolts out of this, so this should just come apart like that. There's your thermostat. You're going to want to make sure that all these surfaces are nice and clean and free of coolant before you install your spacers. Now would be a good time to check your coolant pipe O-rings. This just goes right into there, which is a water pump. And my O-ring looks pretty good, so I'm not going to replace it at this time. There's another O-ring in here. You can check as well, but I'm not going to be taking that out. And the car wasn't leaking coolant before it came, before the engine came out of it, so we should be good. Alright, so you're going to apply your RTV gasket sealant, your Permatex Ultra Black, to each spacer, and then screw it in to the respective part with the respective bolt. Alright, so I have the coolant system spacers installed from the ECOTEC Miata kit. This is what they look like in. I have all the fasteners in. There's 5 different bolts, 4 of them are the same size, and then there's one long one. Long one goes down here, and they have washers for all of them. But that's what that looks. That's what that looks like. Make sure you, when you install this, you get the coolant hose back in there with the O-ring. Make sure your O-ring's okay. So I have the engine flipped over now because I'm going to do the oil pan, and you can see on my engine stand, I have it mounted to these points right here, which are on the oil pan. So in order to install the oil pan, I have to take these out. In order to take these out, I need to have another way of supporting the engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my engine hoist to support the front of it while I do the oil pan. It's kind of janky, but it should hopefully work. Alright, so with the engine hoist, I just have a little bit of pressure right here. You don't need to start cranking on it to the point where it's lifting off the ground. Just enough to support it a little bit. So now I can remove these 2 bolts. Alright, so we got tension on here still. We got the 2 bolts out. Now we're ready to start taking out these bolts so we can install the new oil pan. In case you were wondering, these are 13 millimeter bolts. It's also a good idea to go around and break them all free instead of just taking one out at a time, just so you don't risk breaking anything while you're doing this. It's not an impact pit. You're gonna break stuff. Alright, all the bolts are out of the oil pan. Now it's time to wrestle this thing off. Alright, so the oil pan is held on with some like RTV gasket material. So it's kind of hard to get off. So in order to get it off, you're going to take a pry bar, stick it right in this spot right here, and then push, and then you can see the oil pan separate from the block. Next, you're going to take a razor blade and scrape off this gasket very carefully, being careful not to scratch the aluminum block. Alright, so I have the gasket material removed to the best of my ability all the way around. Make sure that around the edge is very clean when you apply the new sealant, and make sure no debris gets into the engine, or else you're gonna break stuff, and you do not want to do that. For sealing your oil pan, you're gonna want to use the same Permatex Ultra Black that you used for the down here on the spacers, and you're just gonna draw a bead all the way around. According to ECOTEC Miata, a 2mm bead should suffice. The 4 longest bolts included with the kit go here in the front, and you're gonna want to install those hand tight with red Loctite. Make sure you use the included washers for the front bolts in the oil pan. And as for the back 2 bolts, you're gonna use the second longest bolts included in the bag. Also use red Loctite on those and get them hand tight. And the rest of the holes on the oil pan, you're gonna fill with these. These are the shortest included with the kit. And don't use washers or Loctite on these. Get these nice and hand tight now. Alright, I got these all hand tight now. ECOTEC Miata says to use this torque pattern on the bolts and torque them down to 18 foot-pounds. I have all of the bolts torqued to spec on the oil pan, so we're done messing with the oil pan. Now would be a good time to sort out the engine mounts. Next, you're going to want to assemble the left side engine mount, which is as simple as this long bolt, washer, the mount arm, washer, and then the lock nut. And then we're going to install it right here on these. Alright, so here's what it looks like on the engine. It's tight, but it actually does fit around the starter, which is just a testament to how well engineered this kit is, where it has these tight of tolerances. But the top bolts, these two, and this one, it's a 17mm. You're going to install that with the washer. And then this one is a 13mm with a washer. The two on the top you install with these aluminum spacers, and then that's what it looks like in. So here's the mount, and this is ready to be bolted into the actual car now. And then the other side is exactly the same. Bolt, washer, mount, washer, nut, and that's what that looks like in. Next up, we're going to install the dipstick, and that goes right in here in the new oil pan. Next, you're going to take the contents of this unlabeled bag. I'm going to start out with this piece, and you're going to put some thread sealant onto this bottom portion. You don't need a ton of it, just enough to coat the threads. Then you're going to take it, thread it into your oil pan. Then you're going to crank it down a little bit. Not too far though, because it's a brass fitting and it could break. Then you're going to take these pieces, so you have this little ring and you have this cap, so you're going to insert the little ring into the cap, slide the dipstick tube through both of them. Now you're going to tighten this upper compression fitting. Make sure it doesn't twist the dipstick, or it'll make it so the dipstick isn't sitting nice. This is a compression fitting, so it's going to pinch the dipstick in there, make it so it can't come out. See, that's nice and snug in there, and the dipstick is functional because it dips down into the oil pan. Next, you're going to want to remove this bolt off the engine. That's a long boy. You're going to take this little bracket that comes in the kit. It's got a little protective coating on it. You could go ahead and peel that off. Go ahead and start threading this bolt back in. Then you're going to take this little bad boy right here, wrap it around that. Comes with this little bolt. Thread that on through. Now your dipstick, it's in there nice and good, and it ain't going anywhere. Next up, you're going to want to remove this little bleed port here, drill and tap it to ECOTEC Miata specifications, and put in the new coolant temperature sensor. Now you can install your new sensor. Next, we're going to move on to installing the clutch and the flywheel adapter so that the ECOTEC engine works with the Miata stock 5-speed transmission. I'm going to be using a 1.8 flywheel with a Miata Stage 1 clutch kit. You don't want any contaminants on the flywheel because any residue, including the oils from your skin, can cause clutch slipping. So we're going to spray it down with some brake cleaner. Now you're going to take your automatic transmission flex plate, get that on. Now you're going to take your flywheel adapter, now we're going to torque them to 70 foot-pounds. Now we're going to bolt the Miata flywheel to the flywheel adapter, and we're going to torque that down to 75 foot-pounds. So the new flywheel, the teeth on the gear interfere with the factory starter on the ECOTEC engine. So I'm just going to use an angle grinder to trim that a little bit so it clears. But look at that, it fits like a glove now. Rather have too much than not enough. Now we're gonna put the Miata flywheel on. Be careful not to touch the flywheel surface because we already degreased it and made sure there was nothing going on with that. And if you touch it again, you'll have to put more brake clean on it, and that could potentially mess up the pilot bearing. Okay, so the flywheel is now on, it's clearing the starter. Now we're going to actually put the clutch on. So I have here a Miata Stage 1 clutch kit. Ooh. So here's the actual clutch. So we have our clutch alignment tool here. So the way you do this, put that through the pilot bearing. Make sure it's in there good and tight. Then you're going to take your pressure plate, hold that up. Hopefully it fits. Yep, there's the pressure plate there. And then a little bit of finagling, you can get the clutch plate on. Keep your clutch tool in it, clutch alignment tool. Alright, for the pressure plate bolts, the torque spec for those are 14 to 18 foot-pounds. So on the pressure plate bolts, I have some new ones here. I'm going to, again, apply some blue Loctite. And make sure your clutch alignment tool is still in it, don't take it out yet. I'm going to get these in right now, just snugged up a little bit, following the pattern skip 1, skip 1, skip 2. Because this is something that's very important that you torque them all down in the correct way, or again, stuff isn't going to be aligned correctly. Now we're going to torque them down following the same skip 1, skip 1, skip 2 pattern. I'm doing it 18 foot-pounds. Skip 2, and now they should all be torqued to spec. Just double check those. Alright, and now you can remove your all-important clutch alignment tool. Comes right out. Your clutch is properly aligned, and now the engine should be ready to go into the car.